an at-large member. Yes, I got it. I see. Oh man, just threw me off. A little notification. A native of is it Valdez, Jennifer?
Yeah,
Valdez, North Carolina. She graduated from UNC Chapel Hill with a BA in Communication Studies. And then after a 5-year stint in California, she returned to North Carolina to pursue a master's in education at UNCC. Jennifer was an instructor in the English as a second language program for many years at CPCC, and she was the director of diversity and inclusion for the Transit Authority in Louisville, Kentucky. I didn't know that part. That's interesting. Most recently, she held the position of director of education at International House, a nonprofit in Charlotte, that's where we met. That's where our union started. Jennifer has been married to her husband, Jorge, for 23 years, and they have 2 children, ages 15 and 14. So she's also in hormonal turmoil, probably in her house as well. Jennifer is also a current candidate for Mecklenburg County Commissioner at Large. So if you live in Mecklenburg County and you exercise your right to vote, remember that come voting day. So Jennifer, welcome, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure to be with you all this morning. It's my, I think, 3rd time visiting this Rotary Club, and it's always just a great group of people, a welcoming environment. I love, I go to several Rotaries I visit, and I always just love the 4-way test, just the way you remind us all of that at the end. I just think so important. I think we should all live our lives sort of guiding our speech and our thoughts and our hearts around those principles. So thank you for inviting me to share today. What I may be sharing is a little bit different from what maybe you've heard before, but I do think it's important information. It's timely. I mean, we were discussing guns earlier just in the chit chat, and really we're going to talk about addressing gun violence in the community. And I'm going to share a PowerPoint that I have put together, just 6 brief slides, and we'll kind of go through that. And let me make sure I can pull up. Let's see how I do. Are you all able to see that?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now, if I can just play it so it goes bigger. How about that? You able to see that? Okay, good. All right, wonderful. We're off to a good start. So I entitled this morning, Addressing Gun Violence in Our Community. Now, obviously, I am a sitting school board representative at large. And so I will be talking today specifically about some of the strategies that Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools in particular has taken, because I think it's important in my current role to make sure that information gets out in the community. I know there are a lot of questions and a lot of concerns, and so I am here to share that, and including the tragic statistic, which is, as of today, we have confiscated, or we have found 23 guns on our campuses since the beginning of the school year. And sometimes it can be like 12 in a whole year, so we're like double. I don't have the exact averages year over year, but the point is that it's very high. I will tell you, it's a national phenomenon. It's not solely unique to Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, and I do think that's really important for us to keep in mind, the context of it. That guns and weapons, knives have been found as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and what CMS is doing, but what also the community is doing. We have had one that's been fired, unfortunately, but it was outside at the end of a school day, and there were no injuries. So thank goodness for that. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation today, and my experience going to listen to the students from that particular school who asked school board members to come and listen to them. As I said, it's a national phenomenon. There's been an uptick in violent behavior, and multiple articles. If you just Google it, mental health concerns cited nationwide over our students. I think that we were already in many ways in a sort of mental health crisis. And when I say that, I don't mean that there was direct, mental illness. I think there's a lot going on with our students, with social media, with just many stressors, poverty, many things going on. And then I think the pandemic has exacerbated those concerns that were already there, and we're seeing an uptick in just violent behavior across the board. I am fortunately sit in hearings, expulsion hearings, disciplinary reassignment hearings, and so I get to see. Now I don't see it on the front end, and that there's a reason for that I think is really important, because many times the public and the media honestly will express, why aren't we speaking out as school board members when there's a violent act that occurs on a campus, as almost there's this expectation that we should speak to it or set a tone or whatever. And I do believe we have a role in setting a tone, but I do want us all to understand, as school board members, we hear student and employee appeals to decisions that the administration, meaning up through the superintendent's office, makes. So we have this quasi judiciary role. And so just like you wouldn't expect a judge to prejudice a case by speaking out without seeing the facts, we don't speak out either. And unfortunately, the public sometimes gets frustrated with us because they think our role is to do that. And it's actually quite the opposite. So I just wanted to get that in there in case you've ever, been frustrated yourself about our lack of speaking out. We don't see the videos. We don't see what happens until those hearings happen. And I'll tell you, I sat through 4 yesterday where I saw guns being brought on campus, on bus, with video, pictures. And it's really hard to see, but difficult to think about our students who are facing that, and our teachers and our staff who are facing that sort of reality every day. Sometimes I feel like our staff and our students have been left on the front lines of gun control, meaning like collectively as a society, we're not doing enough to address it. And oftentimes people look to the schools, and I'll, get these people, they'll ask me, they'll say, well, what are you going to do to solve it? And certainly I think the school system does have a role. There are things we can do and we are doing, and I'm going to share that with you today. But I would also encourage, and I guess I'm hoping that one of the outcomes of today's talk is that we shift that conversation a little bit, because if our community is looking to the school system to solve for gun control, I think we're looking in the wrong place. And what I mean by that is we are the least resourced government agency that exists. And, really, we're there to teach children. That's what we're there to do. So we're not experts in this. And I would like to see us move away as a community from this idea of, intervention, which is, what is the school system going to do once a child makes a choice to bring a gun to school, to more of a prevention. What are we focusing on to create healthy communities where it helps a child make a different choice, where he or she doesn't want to bring that gun to school, because gun violence happens in our communities and then it spills over into our schools. So hear me when I say that, because I'm sort of on a mission across the county to change that a little bit, because people will say, what are you doing about the guns in school? And I'm like, well, what are we doing about the guns in the community that spill over into our schools? Because we need help. The school system will not solve this alone. But with that said, we do have a part. We take it very seriously. Safety is a top priority. And I do want to share with you some of the superintendent's initiatives that have been implemented around safety and trying to keep our students and staff safe. So we have put together a work group to evaluate, that's staff across the county, multiple different positions, to evaluate many options. And still there are several options on the table that are continuing to be evaluated. One of those is including more campus security associates. These are not school resource officers. I know sometimes that's controversial, and we can have that debate or not today, but I'm talking about CSAs. We also have what's called behavioral modification technicians. These are different positions where they are trained to de-escalate. They're not wearing a police uniform, which I personally prefer. because I think that that can be jarring to some students to have that police presence. But there are other avenues through the BMTs or the CSAs where they're taught de-escalation techniques and sort of more restorative justice practices on how to work with students to get to the root causes of why they might be acting out in a violent manner. This past Monday, CMS implemented an anonymous reporting tool for middle and high school students. It'll go live. The students can practice on it now, and it'll go live, I think, next Monday. You can Google that because there's been a lot of media coverage on it. It's called Say Something. And the idea is it's not just for violence, but any sort of bullying or rumors that you hear. It's an anonymous reporting tool. And, again, it's just one piece of this puzzle of us trying to give resources to our students, to our staff, to report. And I will tell you, many of the guns we have found, it's because a student spoke up. A student found a trusted adult, and they went and they said, hey, I heard so-and-so may have, and that's how we've been able to find it. I will tell you, one gun was even found because a neighbor noticed suspicious activity, and she called the police, and they came, and a gun was placed under a bush outside of a school. And so I say that that's part of this community effort that we've got to create, that if we see something, we need to say something. We are evaluating cost around touchless screening equipment. This is a little bit different than metal detectors. If you've been to like a Panthers game lately, they're less invasive, and that is key because metal detectors actually are quite controversial. There are a lot of people that's also jarring, and they don't want their school site to be seen as like they're in a jail or they're entering this, yeah, I guess that's the best way to say it, sort of a jail environment. But these are more seamless, where you just sort of pass through and they scan, and it won't take also as much time. Because, a lot of people, as soon as there's an incident that happens, a lot of folks jump on board and they're like, we need to do this, we need to do that. Keep in mind, any of this and that means cost. Cost for a school system that doesn't have its own taxing authority, cost for personnel. People want us to have people out there wanding, everybody coming in. I mean, we're talking massive, massive cost. And that's one of the reasons why we don't just move the next day to something, because these things have to be budgeted for and planned for. And I will tell you, thank goodness, we have this influx of cash from the COVID federal relief money, because our budget is mostly controlled by the state of North Carolina. 30% of our operational money comes from the county, from Mecklenburg County. And a lot of our money is very restricted into certain buckets that we just can't move around. And so some of the efforts we've been able to implement is because we have had access to COVID federal money. And it's sort of sad that we're having to use it on that in one sense, because, I think the goal is academic use. But of course, if kids aren't safe or their mental health and other things aren't taken care of, that's certainly an appropriate expenditure for as it's related to the COVID pandemic. We train, I'm looking at number 4, our staff on active shooter situations. Please note, we do not train our students. Some school districts do. I'm not sure if North Carolina, but many times people will get confused about that and say, I can't believe you put children through that trauma. We actually don't. Some would say you need to do it, so there's many views on this, and I'm not here to argue today or debate, which way is the best way to go. But right now, this is where we are. We do not do active shooter situations with the students. We do lockdowns, but with the staff, we do. CMS has the partnership across the county with many other electeds, including the sheriff, the DA's office, judges who are working, district court judges, juvenile cases, again, trying to, see how we can partner in different ways. Let me see if I can move to the next slide. There we go. We have ordered clear backpacks for our high schoolers. We have 140,000 students, so we didn't order them for all. We just focused on high school. Some have already been delivered actually ahead of schedule, and they're working on distribution. I know some of this was controversial. We put out information with all 10 of these, and people just pulled out this one, clear backpacks, and that's not a good idea. You can still hide it in your pocket. Well, yes, of course. This is not intended to be the end all be all, and I would encourage you all to think of this as an enhancement, one piece to the puzzle. The principals really wanted this. Almost all of the guns have been found in a backpack, and it's not meant to say that this is the end all, ultimate solution, but please consider it part of a multifaceted plan. And with a lot of feedback from many of our administrators, again, they're sort of on the front lines of this. The guns are being found literally, and during fights, thank goodness they haven't been fired, but they've fallen out of backpacks onto the hallway floor. And this is what our administrators and our teachers, whom are not being paid well, not that that's the only factor, but I'm just saying that they're not. This is not their job to be on the front lines of gun control. So they really pushed for that. We've doubled the number of random safety screenings in all of our secondary schools. That means middle and high. We've added more social emotional supports. And I'll come back to that in a little bit because I think that's really important. We do employ restorative practices and peer mediation, and we have Zen rooms. Every school is a little bit different in their makeup. But we do try to, de-escalate and get to the bottom of the root causes before violence erupts. And then we are enforcing the consequences for violations of state law and our board policy. And, I told you, I mentioned that I sit in these expulsion hearings. A lot of folks, the parents will come in and they're upset because they're like, my child wasn't intending to shoot the gun. They don't deserve a 365-day suspension, and they'll come and appeal that to us. It's actually a state law. If you bring a gun, loaded or not, on a school campus, our hands are tied. We do hear the hearing, but there's really not much we can do. And so we are enforcing it, and we're trying to get that information out to the community so that folks really know. Obviously we don't want them to bring a gun regardless, but there's real consequences, and it's very sad to sit there and see, some of these parents and the child just distraught because of this one bad decision. Let's see. Okay, so those are some of the things that CMS is implementing. And then I want us to talk about what's the community doing? That was the first question that I brought up. I will tell you from my role, I have been working alongside some Charlotte City Council members, board, the BOCC stands for the Board of County Commissioners, the Mecklenburg County Commissioners. We've created a work group, an intergovernmental work group, where we're trying to identify gaps in the services that we provide our community residents. And this is where your advocacy, you might be able to help out to contribute, even just writing your representatives and, suggesting that we take a closer look at how we can impact violence and through anti-violence campaigns. The city of Charlotte, or even the towns, if you live in another town, they're responsible for safer streets, a sense of belonging, community design and development. What goes into a community drives sort of the way you feel about the community, whether that's, whatever that may be. They have money oftentimes for what's known as out of school time programming. And again, that's really important. You would hope the school system is responsible for what the child does between 8 and 3, but what's going on between 3 and 8? And this is where our municipalities can step in and take a bigger role. They have alternative to violence programming, and then of course other things like affordable housing. It's all interconnected. The county has declared violence a public health crisis. So I think good questions around, well, what does that mean? I will tell you their anti-violence programming as a one-person office right now, and she's fantastic. She does an amazing job, and they have many touch points through the community of how they're doing this. I'd personally like to see some more investment and attention paid to that, including mental health. Again, because many of our community residents are, I think, suffering right now, and it's cyclical, loss of job. We all know we're 50th out of 50 and upward mobility. So this is, for many folks, a tough community to live in. And we may not realize that if you have private health insurance like I do, you don't know what it's like to be waiting for, mental health referrals through the county system. And so this is where we've got to somehow connect more, I think, to understand what all of our community residents are going through. So these are some of the initiatives that the county is responsible for. And then, of course, the schools. I gave you our detailed list. But please know that we cannot do it alone. And I repeat that we've got to focus on the prevention and not just CMS's intervention. I put federal state here at the end. I'm personally in favor of gun sense legislation. I think there's more we can do for tighter controls around the volume and the types of guns that are available. And then I want to show you one last thing, and then I'll take some questions. So the one shot that actually was fired was out of school right before Christmas. It was about December 15th, 17th. And again, no injuries, thank goodness. When we went out, I got emails from my school board email about, 8 students invited school board members to go out and listen. They wanted to convene and have us listen. I thought it was so interesting because when we got there, we heard them out, and they did such an excellent job of advocating. And this was one of their posters that what they were asking for. They wanted more social workers, counselors, psychologists, more mental health resources. This was interesting. They wanted to pay those behavioral modification technicians and the campus security associates more so they could be, look at those words, present for us. Isn't that interesting? And so what I gained from that was there was this real sense of, we want to be seen. We want to be heard. Our ratios, I don't know if you know what they are, but our counselors, the national recommended ratio is like 1 per 250 students, and we're at like 1 per 315. Our school psychologists, the recommended average is 1 per, oh no, sorry. That was funny. That was the superintendent calling me. I don't know if that popped up. Sorry, Mr. Superintendent, I'll have to call you later. I hope I don't have a scheduled meeting with him I forgot about. But anyway, so 1 per 1,344 is our ratio in CMS, and the national recommended average is 1 per 500. So we need like 3 times the number of school psychologists than we currently have. And we need more social workers. I will tell you what I shared with the students that day at the school is I wanted them to understand we actually advocate for that also on the school board. And a lot of folks don't understand that the way that we're governed and the way we're funded. So we have a legislative agenda. We presented it to the Mecklenburg delegation, to the General Assembly this past January. We're on a biennium, so they do that every 2 years. And one of the requests was just that, more, we call them SEL positions, social emotional learning positions, psychologists, school counselors, and social workers. Senator Muhammad, I don't know if anyone is in Senate District 38, but you should know that Senator Muhammad helped file a bill on our behalf for that. It died in committee, so it didn't make it anywhere. But I'm telling you that because I want us all to understand that process. CMS is advocating for these positions. We've advocated for these positions with the Mecklenburg County commissioners. Oftentimes they don't get funded, and we're going to continue to advocate for more. We are spending some temporary COVID dollars to hire 55 more of those type of positions. Those are not sustainable funds, meaning when they run out, we'll either have to lay those people off or we'll have to go to the state or the county to pick up the funding. So, any questions you have about how that works and how your advocacy at the governmental level, so that we can provide those things that the students are asking for. And then also reach out to your city council members, your county commissioners, and, if you feel so inclined, to say, hey, we're all in this together. I mean, maybe your neighborhood, you don't hear shots being fired, right? And that's fine. But I think we can all hopefully come to an agreement that, we're all in this together and we all affect one another. And it's the health of our general community. So I certainly appreciate your advocacy to that end, and I'll take some questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. Kevin, if you'd like to go first.
Thank you. Jennifer, thanks for presenting this compelling presentation today. You mentioned, of course, that 23 guns had been seized. Do you know how many of those guns were reported stolen versus number of guns that came from the home?
Most of them were stolen. I don't know that they had been reported stolen, because sometimes the people, when they lose track of them, they're not reporting them, in the system.
Right.
But it's a lot of them. A lot of them have. And I will tell you, sometimes they are found in the home or in the car of the family. And so I forgot to mention that. I need to go back and add that to my slide deck. We do guns lock safety education program. And
Good.
we're also working with Be Smart, a program with Moms Demand Action, to do a county-wide initiative around gun lock safety education for those families who do choose to have a gun, that they really understand the importance of that.
Well, my question is pertaining to that. Do you know if there's any legislation pending, or is anyone looking at consequences for those families who don't do adequate gun safety at home? And I'm particularly referring to the recent incident in Oxford, Michigan, that resulted in such a catastrophe for that school district and the families involved, because the parents did such a terrible job of actually being responsible gun owners.
Right. So I did have a few people write me after that incident in Michigan, and that propelled me to dig deeper. It's my understanding we have no law like that in North Carolina. As far as if anyone's pursuing it, I have not heard. That's a great question for us to advocate with our state senators and state House representatives, because I think it's a worthwhile venture. A lot of people do ask us, they're like, why don't you hold the parents accountable? And to my knowledge, there's no law structure that allows us, or the police department or sheriff or whoever to do that.
Well, that's something I would certainly advocate for, because if you want to start prevention, start at the home and have some consequences. Of course, consequences for the person who actually does it, but the gun owners absolutely need to be held accountable for this. Thank you.
That was actually, those were my questions and comments as well, Kevin, because like a child can't bring a gun to school if they don't have access to it. Now the stolen guns, that's a whole different level. But I actually used to work, when I worked in the school system, had a child who had access to his mother's gun because she just left it on, her side table, and she didn't care. She just, asked her about a safe, and she was like, So, if the child doesn't have access to it, they can't bring it to school. So I'm with you there. In fact, we should be asking that on any kind of gun application if there are children present in the home. And that should be a whole nother level of education on being a gun owner. So, Emily.
So I actually have a question, but I want to also first off say thank you for not doing the active shooter drills down here and doing more of the teacher education. My kiddos, I have a 5th grader and a 3rd grader, and they have been doing active shooter drills since they were in kindergarten. So we came from Northern Virginia, from Alexandria, and, they will tell us, they know how to hide and they know what to do whenever, my 3rd grader came home last year, was so excited because he finally got to do an active shooter drill when he was in the bathroom, and he knew how to stand on the toilet and do all of these things. And it was like, my husband and I were sitting there at dinner going, just completely mind blown that was a discussion that they had, and that he had to be taught that. Like, it just amazed me. But with that, we are coming from the school district that has made a lot of national news lately, which is Fairfax County in Virginia, and a lot of their pieces, and they are seeing significant violence. I'm curious, in the 23 cases, like the disagreement that was going on, was it something that was social media based? Was it something diversity based? Because what they're seeing in Fairfax County is they're realizing they're pushing this agenda of diversity, and that, you know, they're pitting almost kids against each other. And that's what's causing the increase in violence is, you know, they're telling them, well, you're privileged, you're privileged, you're privileged. So then the kids are getting in fights because they don't like the fact that they're being told that they're privileged. And it's just like, but, you know, they had a recent disagreement at one of the high schools up there, and it was because they went through a class, and this was at one of the high schools, and the teacher decided to tell the students that if there were any military children in the classroom, that is a privilege, and that they are, since they are military children, that they are a privilege. And there ended up being a huge fight afterwards that, you know, a knife ended up coming into play and all of these things, because they ended up attacking the military kids. And it was just like, you know, because they were privileged and they need to acknowledge that they were privileged. And so I'm just curious, like the increase in violence, if it is kind of in that stem of the diversity and the pushing and all of these things. So what's driving it?
Sorry, I'm trying to look up a quick quote here that I think, if I can pull it up, I will share it. I don't know if I'll be able to find it quick enough. So to my knowledge, no one in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools is asking teachers to send a message that anyone is privileged in that sense. Certainly not in a shameful way. So I think it's interesting the way that you've described it, because I will tell you that I am a very privileged person. I carry with me a lot of privilege walking around, you know, as a white woman, as a straight woman, as even a tall woman. Like, isn't that interesting? Like, sometimes I think, yes, I think people just trust me because I have a presence about me. I mean, you know, and I'm like, there's a lot of privilege that I am willing to fully admit that I carry with me, and people give me many benefits of the doubt. I don't see that as a negative thing in that sense, you know, of being able to acknowledge that. And certainly, I think the efforts, if they're done correctly, to acknowledge privilege that absolutely exists in our society, should never come across trying to shame anyone, because shame doesn't motivate change. Shame doesn't get to the heart of it. And I'm trying to think of Baldwin's quote. If I can find it, I'll look it up, around how shame is a luxury that we don't, and this was a Black man in the 60s who was like, you know, he would force a man thinking decades above his time around, you know, shame as a luxury that he doesn't have, he's not looking for. And so I don't think that most people, certainly if they're on an anti-racist path, like I like to consider myself to be on, is looking to shame anyone, like you're in the military or this or that. So I can't speak for individual. I mean, look, we have 19,000 employees. So I'm not going to sit here either and say that some of our employees, some of our teachers haven't said things that are off base from my point of view. Certainly those things can happen. So I'm not going to pretend that they don't. We're all in a different like spectrum on where we are in thinking about these sort of relations. But I do know, although we can't account for all of the teachers' individual behavior around the way that they present it, that training is given to them in the sense of professional development that explains concepts around, you know, the fact that, you know, my parents were able to walk in, even though they weren't wealthy, to a bank and get a loan, you know, in the 60s in a way that, you know, other families couldn't. And that's just a reality. And so that by default is privilege. And so I think when you say things like that and you teach it in that manner, then it's not in a shameful way. It's just an acknowledgement. So certainly I don't think within CMS that is necessarily the case. But, you know, kids talk about race. I listen to my kids. They talk about it differently than when I talked about it. And I actually think a lot of it's really, really good. Sometimes I'm like, whoa, kids, hold on. I think you're getting out of your lane. And my kids are biracial, just so you know. And so I think my husband is from Peru, just like Mr. Jim's new wife is as well. I can see his llama or alpaca there behind him. And so I think because of their biracial and everything, they talk about in a very free way. And sometimes I have to even check them because I'm like, I think you're getting a little too loose there with your words in a way that they think of as joking. And I'm trying to really pay attention to what this new sort of teenage language around these issues are. I'm sorry, that was a really long response, but I felt it was worth it to sort of dig in deeper to your comments.
No, and I appreciate that. And that was kind of where I was, it's, as my husband and I put it, it's been like coming back to normal, has been moving out of the DC world and moving down here we're with normal people again. And it's more of that rationale. It's the logical way of thinking of things. But I was just curious, like how much of the violence was, but that helps. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think that's I know that this is a little off topic now, but I think that's a really fascinating discussion that we should have at some point with psychiatrists or psychologists just around how is the message of privilege even being, because like some people easily acknowledge it, right? But there are other people who are ultimately privileged because of their skin color, but who have struggled all of their life and do not see themselves as privileged at all. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how do you have that discussion? And then at what age are children even able to process that, right? Because, like a lot like with speech, kids develop certain, abilities at different ages. And so really, when does that happen? And are we doing a disservice to them by bringing it up too early? And then like, what is the conversation around showing differences and showing how much higher the hurdles are for entire groups of individuals, and acknowledging that and trying to make it better, for everyone to be equal. So I think that's a discussion that I would love to have in this
club, or
back,
not in
this
let's
club,
dig
but
in deeper.
You know Seriously, what I mean?
But have me back and let's dig in deeper. And if I can notice that both Kevin and Eric did put the quote in, that's exactly the one I was thinking of. I get nervous. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to find it on my phone, but that's exactly what I was looking for. Look at that. I'm not interested in anybody's guilt. Guilt is a luxury that we can no longer afford. So please read that later, but it's super powerful. And he was saying that in the 60s. And I feel like some of us are just now sort of grasping it. A man beyond before his time. Did you have a question?
I just wanted to add something on this about white privilege. There certainly is a disparity in privilege in our society, but I think we're approaching it in the worst possible way by declaring it as white privilege. These are not privileges that I don't deserve. These are privileges that everybody deserves. And that's where we ought to be focusing on, where our system blocks people from having these privileges, or the prevailing attitude of people like myself is blocking it. That's where we ought to be focusing on. Is the solution to tear down my privileges so that I'm as unprivileged as other members of the community? That's like Castro eliminating the difference between rich and poor by making everybody poor.
But I'm not sure who is trying to do that. I mean, I'm not trying to do that. I don't see my white privilege as meaning my life wasn't difficult. It means that there were many difficulties that weren't put in my way. And so I'm okay with like acknowledging that. And again, I think sometimes we got to be careful about the culture wars that spiral out of assuming that certain people mean certain things. And certainly I don't think anyone's interested in, taking away privileges, but it's a pie and we can give it to all, right? So I think you're right on point on that piece.
I don't think anybody is trying to take away those privileges, but the people that I would like to get on board with anti-racism are put off by this. Right away, they think it is an attack on them. So it's a horrible way of communicating.
We've got to get better at reaching across the divide on this and really digging in deeper. I agree. Yep. Quanta, did you have a question?
Yes, this is a little bit different than what you are talking about right now. I was going back to the violence in school system and the children. Instead of just being reactionary to what is going on, are there any courses or electives that the middle schoolers and the high school kids can take in the curriculum that gives them a sense of identity, a human identity that is contrary to what is going on in the media. It's always, solving your problems with the guns and bad guys and good guys. So I'm wondering if there is, because my kids are 50 and 44, so they've been out of school for a long time. I don't know what is going on in the school system. So are there
Yes.
classes in the curriculum to give them a better sense of what it means to be a human being?
Absolutely. So let me answer that on two folds. We do have a social and emotional learning curriculum that's taught from K to 12, where it's almost like in homeroom. There's specific time set aside to dig into deeper issues. And a lot of it is around identity and sense of belonging and how to process if you're feeling the blues or, just different social issues and a way for the teachers and the students to connect. So that is interwoven throughout our curriculum. But I will tell you that some people try to twist that. I mean, I get people who write me on a regular basis and they're like, don't you do that social emotional learning? You're teaching my kids a bunch of mumbo jumbo and what they need to do is reading, writing, and arithmetic, And so that can be controversial because it's sort of blown out of proportion. And the curriculum is available. We can all see it online. I can send it to you. There's nothing sneaky that, certainly CMS is trying to brainwash kids or anything like that, but it is an opportunity to connect, to create a sense of belonging. The second piece of that I think is important, do note that the state of North Carolina, both through legislation and through the State Board of Education, set the standards for our curriculum of what we need to teach and requirements for graduation. We have a really tight schedule to get a child to graduate. There's not a lot of electives and things like that. However, with the flexibility that we have to choose curriculum that matches, that aligns with the state standards, we and CMS in particular have invested in curriculum that's what we call more culturally responsive or culturally relevant. And I do think that that's really important because the stories we're reading in English language arts, for example, are much more diverse and just different points of view of people, of the, who's telling the story. And inclusive in many ways. And that also sparks conversation in the classroom that I think creates a sort of environment that makes sure everyone has a sense of belonging and feels included. So both the SEL curriculum and then through the curriculum that we may use through, say, our English language arts, we're able to have those deeper conversations. And I think the kids see themselves, they're more reflective in the books that they're reading.
So if
That's
I
right,
actually,
baby.
I was going to say, if I could actually share, I don't know if you guys know this, Charlotte Speech and Hearing Center, we developed a program a couple years ago called YOLA, and it's mindfulness, and it's actually yoga and the language. So what they started doing, we do this a lot at the Ren West STEAM Academy with those kiddos. Mm-hmm. And the teachers love it because they're able to take the lessons and reinforce them in the classes, but it's having that outside person sharing this knowledge that the kids suddenly like grasp onto it more, which is really interesting. But it's all tied to their language skills. It's all tied to their language and their literacy skills, and using, yoga as a mindfulness piece, as a pause, as a way to process things, to be able to do it. But it got such a great response with our elementary kids that we actually integrated it all the way through the preschool. So we even have our 18-month-olds in our Sound Beginnings program are now doing yoga and doing YOLA and having mindfulness moments in some of their therapies. So that's one of the things that we've started doing that's kind of cool.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And if I can also share it, just on how sometimes these things, I'm so glad it's being well received. But even around sort of the culture wars, and I do want us to pay attention to this because I think we're going to see an uptick in our society of questioning everything. Just this past year, the state of Alabama reversed a law that they passed in the 90s banning yoga. So it was seen as like this new age, oh my gosh, they're saying namaste, it's a foreign language, it must be bad.
A pagan witchy practice.
Exactly. And so it was just this past year that their legislature reversed a law and now will even allow it. And so I just pay attention when things like that, because I agree, the yoga program, that sounds amazing, but there will be people who will be like, whoa, 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 what's going on? And I just think it's important that we understand what it's really about. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that's why we tie in the literacy piece, because they come back at us and go, well, wait a second, you're supposed to be doing language skills. And we're like, yes, but the yoga is helping the language skills. And we have data and research to prove it. So they're like, oh, okay, never mind then. It's okay then. You can do it if as long as it's tied to that. And we're like, okay, thank you.
You know, it's interesting. Ireland is actually working on an empathy curriculum and they've started rolling it out into their schools. So it's more about basing on, you know, developing empathetic skills. So if we have a better understanding of each other and more grace with each other's struggles, we might actually not see, you know, folks needing to come to guns. I do have one question, because my own kiddos have, my bio children have had issues with this, with children in their school system breaking the rules and then it being a no tolerance policy and nothing ever happened to them. That same child was still in the classroom the next day. And, you know, so, you know, in terms of bullying or, you know, there was one that was like, he was doing stuff to a teacher. So what is, and they're in union, so I can't speak for CMS, but like, how are children able to resolve their issues? Because like, if they're feeling like they've been disrespected, like they have no other option except to bring a violent weapon to school to solve their problem, like what are we doing to help kids resolve issues before it gets to that point?
Right. So I mentioned earlier, we do employ what's known as restorative practices, and I can send you a really great video. Our facilities and operations committee did a review from these folks. They presented to the board. You know, our board of education has committees, and we oversee different things just to, you know, make sure we're in the loop on how with the direction that our district is going. Because I think it would be really great to watch, like how the teachers, the counselors, whoever meet with students, you know, to resolve issues from elementary on. We do have the peer mediation that also happens. Sometimes it's easier to hear that from a friend than an adult that, hey, you've been, you know, you shouldn't have said that word or whatever it is. I will tell you, and in particularly now, y'all, we are North Carolina. I'm just going to be real for a minute. I mean, I'm always real, but North Carolina is ranked 49th out of 50th in public school funding. Let's be clear. Mecklenburg County, when you compare it to our tax base, meaning we're a wealthy county, Mecklenburg County's contribution, while a big number in the 500 million range, is ranked 83rd out of 100. There are other school districts that give a lot more money to the school system than both Mecklenburg County and North Carolina. And I know that people tire of this sense of, well, we just can't throw money at the school system. I want to be very clear. North Carolina has never thrown money at the school system. So let's just start there, because we have got to shift that. I hear that a lot in the community. Oh, we all just have it. No, we really don't. And so I say that not to just make excuses and to blame others, but, you know, a lot of people will come to us and they're like, well, you need to partner with a nonprofit organization to like fix whatever the issue is. And I love our nonprofit partners, including Promising Pages. I mean, we have some amazing nonprofit partners that help us in filling gaps in ways that we can't. But we also have to invest and encourage our business community and our taxpayers to be in favor of direct funding, where we can scale to a level, because our teachers our counselors, our psychologists, when we have 1 per 1,344 and we should be 1 per 500, as amazing as they are not able to do what we need to be able to do to run the school system the way that I think you would envision as a well-run school system. And so there's a 27-year-old lawsuit called the Leandro case against the state legislature for its failure to provide a sound basic education to the students of North Carolina. So when people come to me and they're like, well, what you're doing is criminal to those students. And I'm like, yes, it actually is. 2 judges, 27 years, the Supreme Court have all said it's absolutely criminal what we do to the education system. So yes, we have a responsibility to create the culture that invites restorative practices. Yes, we have a responsibility to do everything that we can. I would also ask you all as constituents, as residents of our community, to write your legislators and your county commissioners and ask that we are funded in a different way that makes systemic change. Because, getting $50,000 from X company to buy us, 10,000 laptops or whatever, like those are all wonderful moments, but we need multiple millions of dollars. And so I'm an advocate for direct funding as well, so that our folks can do what they know how to do best. And then also keep in mind, this has been so exacerbated by the pandemic. I mean, 2 weeks ago, right when we came back from the Christmas break, we were averaging over 1,000 teacher absences a day. 1,000. I was volunteering at the schools. I mean, it's gone down. Now we're about 500, 600, but because of COVID, we're just spinning, just trying to keep the schools open. But definitely, I mean, the superintendent's been very clear. Instruction is being impacted, because he's not trying to fake it like we're doing a stellar job. And that's not because of the efforts of the teachers and staff. I think they're doing the best that they can, but it's been hard. So I'm saying that if you know a teacher, if you know an administrator, if you know a counselor, give them a hug. If you know a school board member, give us a hug. It's been a hard 2 years. Yeah.
Well, Jennifer, thank you so much. I was actually going to ask you, what can we do? And you went ahead and asked, and vote, kids. Your representation on your county commissioner on the board makes a difference, and on the school board. So use your, vote. Jennifer, pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for all you're doing. And, hopefully all you're also going to be doing potentially as a county commissioner in the future. I wish I could vote for you, but I'd have to move back into Mecklenburg County, and I don't want to do that. So
well, I appreciate you all. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer.
And as we close out, let's do our 5-way test. I don't think we've got anything else on our agenda at this point. So of all the things we think, say or do, first, is it the truth?
The truth.
Second, is it
Is
fair,
it fair to all
concerned?
concerned?
Third, will it
build
goodwill and better friendships?
friendships?
Lag. And fourth,
Will it be
fifth, or
Will it
fifth,
be
fourth, would be beneficial. Will it be beneficial to all
to all
concerned?
concerned?
I lost my place. And fifth, will it be
Will it be
fun?
fun?
Yeah, it do.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Take
you.
care of yourselves,
Thanks.
everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Stay inside if you
Bye.
can.
Have a
Enjoy
nice
this. Enjoy the
weekend.
snow.